And we're on. So welcome all to Smart Growth Social. We have 120 people registered, 51 on so far. Maybe some folks are still having dinner, but they can skip my intro part anyway. Welcome, obviously a difficult time in the world, in the year, in this particular year, to have a normal Smart Growth Social. We miss Eastern Market and 200 people having a grand old time there. But it can't be, but we will have this moment of retreat with Smart Growth, sort of a simpler time, perhaps, for, where we can think about, how we're trying to change the world for the better overall. I'm going to go ahead and start PowerPoint just to walk through a couple of slides. It will not be death by PowerPoint, I promise. There you go. So it is our 8th annual Smart Growth Social. We have done it again at Eastern Market every year. We miss doing it there this year, and hopefully we get next year. Quick Zoom instructions. I doubt there's a single person on here who doesn't know how to Zoom now. And maybe your grandkids first taught you, but you all whizzes at it right now. Mute button on the left. You can turn off your video on the left as well if you need to step away or something like that, or talk to a family member. The chat will be open all day. This is where or all evening, we'd like to put your questions in there for the Q&A with Beth. But you can also use a chat with your friends, since this is, after all, a social. And then you can use the reactions button to provide, reactions or raise your hand for a question or something there. But generally put your questions in the chat. The agenda, I'll give you some quick updates here. Introduce Beth Osborne for her keynote, followed by question and answer, followed by social breakouts, and we'll have up to 5 social breakouts. And depending on how many people we have, you'll have a lot of interaction in those. We've got some great conversation items and a little photo contest, photos you can look at. When we're done with the breakouts, we'll come back to the whole gathering. We'll do a poll on the photos and pick our winner. In addition, we've got a couple polls sprinkled through the presentation today. I do want to thank our sponsors. Just like a traditional event, we have secured sponsors for this. What I love about it is the diversity of folks that we have sponsoring us. First, on our platinum side, we have EYA, who builds many transit-oriented communities in and around the DC region, and also New Legacy Partners, LLC. Ron Eichner is their principal, along with his son, and he's on our Champions Council as well. Those wonderful infill buildings in DC and some of the surrounding communities. Our silver sponsors include Chris Miller at our parent organization, the Piedmont Environmental Council. PEC and CSG together represent perhaps the best rural, suburban, urban collaborative in the nation in trying to shape where and how we grow. We have some old stars here in Harriet Tregoning and Jeff Anderson, another power couple of Smart Growth from Smart Growth America and EPA days, among many other places. Other developer allies that you see here in Bill Alsop, Bozzuto, East Bank, just a significant number of supporters, bids like National Landing, an affordable housing developer in Somerset, and a transportation firm in VHB. We appreciate all their support as well as our bronze supporters. The diversity gets even bigger here because we have individual supporters of ours, supporters from across DC, Maryland, and Virginia on our host committee, conservation groups, transportation consulting groups, land use consulting groups, attorneys, developers, etc. So this represents the diversity, the breadth of the Smart Growth movement, and we thank all of our supporters here. I will pause. I don't know how many are on right now. I'm not looking at my screen, but I want to recognize that we have Governor Glendening with us, former Governor Glendening, the father of Smart Growth nationally, having initiated it in Maryland and always been a great mentor to us. Welcome, Governor Glendening. Welcome as well we have delegates who have signed up to attend. Delegate Watts, Vivian Watts from Northern Virginia, Delegate Mark Corman from Maryland, Council Member Hans Riemer from Montgomery County Council, Council Member Conrad Hurling from Greenbelt, Council Member Phil Duncan from Falls Church, to reflect some of the diversity of jurisdictions that are joining us. And we also have another VIP that I've been told, and that's Sonia Brihi's mom. So Sonia and our staff, her mom's checking up on her here. And here's your staff. I've mentioned Sonia, our Northern Virginia Advocacy Manager. Many of you know Cheryl Court, our Policy Director, our Affordable Housing Guru and lead for DC. Jane Lyons, our Maryland Advocacy Manager, who you've heard on Kojo, as well as in other media, has been very active as our third generation Maryland Advocacy Manager with a lot of focus on Montgomery. Sonia's taken on a huge job, Northern Virginia, a lot of the focus on Fairfax, which alone is a huge job in trying to bring more sustainable development and transportation to Northern Virginia. Emily Maurer is our star communications assistant. She is put this whole event together, and she's right out of the University of Maryland, following the footsteps of Jane, who came out of the University of Maryland. And finally, Bill Pugh is volunteering with us as our senior policy fellow. He is taking his talents in transportation and land use planning and leading our climate fight. And finally, our Champions Council with our chair, Allison Davis. These are our wise advisors that support us in addition to the board of the Piedmont Environmental Council, our fiduciary board. I'll quickly summarize some of the things we're working on. What I want to say is that we've never missed a beat. I think most of you feel like it. You've all been working twice as hard amid the pandemic on the issues you care about, both trying to advance existing programs while trying to deal with the impacts of the pandemic. One of these is transit and trying to save transit. Among the things we did with our business partners at Metro Now is get over 100 sign-ons from elected officials, environmental leaders, business groups, and labor. Extremely diverse coalition for the second stimulus package we need to save transit, both Metro and the other smaller transit agencies around our region, around the country. Second, we have spent a lot of time at the regional scale on housing as a solution, and we've been given significant credit by COG leaders for pushing them to make their additional commitments for housing near transit, bringing more housing into the region to support our jobs and put 75% of it near transit. And we're putting smart growth in the forefront and fighting climate change. And thankfully, Bill Pugh's with us on that. I have to say, folks, this is our #1 problem with our major transportation agencies, is the unwillingness to try to reduce the amount of driving vehicle miles traveled to address climate change. In DC, where Cheryl's our lead champion on the comprehensive plan update, we're pushing hard for it to be approved by the end of the year. But at a minimum, if we miss that, we don't want this council to wait very long beyond that. And because a lot of housing is held up if that plan is not approved. Cheryl continues to strengthen and expand inclusionary zoning. Her accessory dwelling unit how-to manual is due out soon. And we continue to support with our other partners street transformation in our city. Poll time. Emily, lead the poll. What we've got here is, what is your favorite kind of missing middle housing? So you've got a garden apartment on the upper left, a sixplex on the right, a triplex on the upper right, a garden apartment on the lower left, and a sixplex, one from Richmond as an example, next to row homes for you to take a look at there. So let's get that polling in. We're 19 seconds into the poll. Oh, it's a competitive race. Looks like the sixplex and the garden apartment are fighting it out here. We've got 78% voted. Who's not voting? Probably staff, probably me. %85 voted. All right, closing the poll in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Close the poll. Garden apartment wins in a tight race. So we all love missing middle. So that's terrific. This is something that groups around the region and around the country are looking at. In addition to transit-oriented development, we want to see where we can gracefully grow in other transit accessible places to provide the diversity of housing that we need. And many neighborhoods, especially starting with the streetcar suburbs, grew this way for many years. So we'll move on for some continued updates. CSG in Virginia, we've got, let's see, I've got to get rid of the poll here. Hold on. Did you guys get to see the poll? I'm sharing it now. Okay, so CSG in Virginia, a lot of Sonia's time on safe and active transportation. We're planning a big summit next spring. We've had a series of educational webinars. As you may know, and Beth is going to talk about this, it is dangerous on those suburban roads right now. We're losing pedestrians and cyclists because of the speeds and designs of those roads. It is a major fight, including on Richmond Highway or Route 1 in Fairfax, where we're having to fight for redesign of it and speed reductions together. We're also, an example of the coalitions we work in is our Fairfax Healthy Communities Coalition, linking all these different sectors. West Falls Church Metro is looming as our next big fight to try to support more development there and not have VDOT just push to widen all the roads and make it less walkable. And we're also, again, in each jurisdiction, going to be very involved in the climate plans. We have our next poll. How walkable is your neighborhood? On the left is the 15-minute concept, which in Paris, Melbourne, many other countries, it's really the latest version of what we've been talking about at CSG for years. In the middle is a arterial road that's kind of tough to cross. And number 3 on the right is what we call our Where's the Center in Centerville slide. And so we're checking with you, how walkable is your neighborhood? Which of these is closest to where you are? So the one in the middle could be the arterial, and behind it, you could have this great, nice, quiet, walkable neighborhood. You could potentially walk to the stores there, but perhaps the road looks like that. So that's our example of it could be better. So we have 75% voted. I'm going to close the poll in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Close the poll. All right, you guys have all, we're preaching to the choir. You've all done your best to find and live in a walkable 15-minute neighborhood. Hopefully you'll then take the wonders of that and show your family and your friends so that they all will try to do the same. And as you know, not everybody has had this opportunity. That's why we're trying to fix those places that look like Centerville on the right, and why we spend so much time out there in the suburbs. Final update, and last but not least, is Maryland. Jane has led a terrific effort funded by Kaiser, working with challenging racism to have courageous conversations on the legacy of redlining and segregation in Montgomery, what it means today, what we can do about it. She's also put together one of our most diverse new groups, bringing in new young activists to be engaged in, urban planning and the Montgomery County Thrive 250 general plan. She just had 2 big wins this week, the preliminary vote on ending the housing moratorium, which is block housing near transit and near jobs, as well as supporting a tax abatement that just survived a veto from the county executive. This is just for development on the metro station parcels, which has moved too slowly and will provide up to 15% affordable units on it. Jane and I are both working on the 495-270 debate and pushing for our transit-oriented alternative. And Cheryl's working on, with Rodney and others, to build the Rise Prince George's group to campaign for TOD transit and housing in Prince George's. I'll pause for a toast. And I think I'll stop sharing for just a second here so I can see everybody. And Sonia, let's go with Ted and make sure everybody can see everybody in gallery. We're now up to 62 participants. Looks like I already drank my libation here getting ready for this. Again, an interesting time. I'm thankful to all of you, our supporters. I'm thankful for all you do in the community. I am deeply appreciative and try to be understanding of you parents who are trying to do it all, do it both, of our essential workers, teachers, hospital workers, and everything in this time. And also anybody who's a manager, a leader, an elected official. Certainly those elected officials right now are not getting paid enough at the local level for what they're doing, what they're having to deal with right now. I also, for one moment, want to have us think about how many people have been lost and how much we all want to fight to not lose any more. But it is good to see all of you, because I see people who are hopeful. I see people who all work for positive change, and here's to all of you for that. So thank you very much. I don't know how many folks raise your little reaction hand if you did Emily's little smart growth spritzer, her fall spritzer. using apple cider. There's a lot of great local cideries. We didn't have enough chance to line them up for sponsorships, but she has a nice little sparkling spritzer recipe, which you can find on the webpage. So hopefully the rest of my staff is monitoring the chat because I can't do that at the same time. So I'm going to share the screen again and introduce our guest speaker here. There she is, Beth Osborne, Director of Transportation for America. I don't know where to begin. She is one of our fearless leaders. She is our fearless leader on transportation. She and Calvin and their team collectively on smart growth and transportation and economic development have put together one of the most powerful teams we have for sharing the best policy solutions for our nation and sharing them with groups like ours and partnering with us. She's a former acting assistant secretary for transportation policy at USDOT and a former deputy in that position as well. She managed the Tiger Grant program, which was a great program, livability initiatives, and transportation reauthorization reform ideas. She's going to tell us about what she's going to try to do to bring all that good stuff back and then some. She also worked with she formerly worked with Senator Tom Carper of Delaware, a senator who comes out of the same Navy field that I came out of, so near and dear to my heart. She also worked for environmental policy, the Southern Governors Association. I noticed that. So what I'm thinking is she's not afraid of a challenge if she wants to work with environmental policy in the South. So she's not afraid of a challenge. She's taking on the challenge of transportation right now. And I'd like us to all have a virtual big hand for Beth, and we're going to turn over screen sharing to her so she can give you her presentation, and then we'll have Q&A.
Hey everyone, I will start screen share in a minute. I just want to start by saying that I am definitely not here to tell you what I am going to do. I'm going to talk about what we need to do together because it seems that people don't just vote a particular way because Beth Osborne tells them to. I know it's unfortunate and it should be that way, and yet it's not. So the way we get things done is by collaborations with organizations like CSG, like so many organizations like that across the country, because the networks that they command mean more to the decision makers than me or even my organization. And it is our trading information back and forth that makes us a force. So that's what I want to talk about. I do recognize that, in a better time, we would all be together. Many of us would be seeing each other more regularly and getting to work with one another in person. Many of you I'd be running into in my neighborhood or setting up play dates for our kids to play together since, we're all in the same area. And I just want to say right off the bat how many of the people on this Zoom that I miss seeing in person. And I look forward to a day where we get to not just see each other for work, but get to see each other for fun. In work, the world has changed a lot too. We've all had to change the way we move around or don't move around. Most of us are working from home a lot of the time. We've seen transit get clobbered by the lack of commuters. We've seen traffic patterns completely change. And even as driving has ticked back up, it's not the same kind of driving that we saw before COVID. We've seen jobs lost right as transit gets hit, and many of them are struggling to pay for housing and their vehicles, and that's going to continue. But it's also shown a light on all of the things that are wrong with the transportation system and the built environment that we have been talking about for years and years. We have been laying out for the public and policymakers many problems that we saw as glaring, but unfortunately others didn't get to see as starkly as they are seeing now. Now it's just a lot harder to ignore. And, just thinking about some of them, and this is where I will screen share, if it will let me. It is not letting me screen share. Stuart, can you go ahead and put the slides back up? Thank you. So one of the things that we have seen during COVID is what dangerous design does to behavior. Our streets are built for vehicle speed. We have laid out our communities in a way that makes trips that used to be short longer. And in many ways, we try to make those long, unnecessarily long trips more convenient by telling drivers that they can go super fast. Um, on a normal day, traffic slows them down and forces drivers to go a safer speed than the design of the road would indicate. But we don't see the same traffic that we used to see, and people are taking advantage of it. Some are driving dangerously, but some, quite frankly, are just driving the speed that the roadway indicates is okay. And as a result, we're seeing a higher rate of crashes, and they're deadlier. We're also seeing that because so much of the road is dedicated to cars, that at a time where we need more space to move around outside and be active and be healthy, there isn't a lot of space for people to be outside. And in many communities, the overwhelming majority of public space is the roadway. So if we can't take space for people there, there's no place to go. If we jump to the next slide, the other thing we are reminded of is how essential transit is. But what I think has been very exciting is it has not been hard to convince some people who used to be transit skeptics that it is essential, not because there are transit dependent populations, but we are all dependent on essential workers getting to their jobs. So yes, there are people that rely on transit to get to work, but we're all transit dependent because it doesn't help us, even if we can drive ourselves to the hospital, if when we get there, the people we rely on to run that hospital can't be there. And that message has really struck. And I'm hoping that that's something that can carry in to debates going forward about the importance of transit. And we can just consider for a second what has occurred in recent months. If we go on to the next slide, this is a headline that I would never have predicted a few years ago, but we got $25 billion for transit operating support, which apparently you can't see, but that's okay. There you go. And this was not a terribly hard sell. We reached out to Republican leadership in the Senate and Democratic leadership in the House, and people responded. They got that our economy does not function, that our hospitals and groceries and places like that don't function if people can't get to work, and many of our essential workers depend on transit. That is something that again, if you'd asked me a year ago, I would have told you there's no universe under which the federal government gives out a huge amount of money for transit operating. We have seen a huge number of cities open streets to people, not cars, and slow streets down. On the next slide, and there might be some folks, from RTC on the call, they've been keeping a map, if you click again, that shows how many communities across the country have put in place special short-term trail systems or open streets or slow streets to make space for people. Many of these cities were not able to get people to support this in a different time, but now that they've been exposed to it, they really like it. And many of these actions may end up being permanent, or some version of that being permanent. They've been replacing parking for other services like drop off and pickup, or for restaurant seating. And I just want to remind folks of how crazy it is that this is something many of us have argued for years, to use the curb in a different way, to make space for people and parklets and seating, because it was good for the economy. And now we don't have to talk people into it. We're doing this to save the economy, to save restaurants and things like that. On the next slide, we had a really interesting couple of years in Congress. The Senate bill was a disappointment, but unfortunately, it was not a huge surprise. It was a reauthorization bill that basically said, let's put more money in the current system with all of its flaws and just double down on that. But what was a huge surprise is we laid out three what we consider to be pretty, you know, high level targets. I mean, we didn't think we were going easy on anybody. And we got a House bill that ticked all of our priorities. Something, again, I would not have predicted. Now there's discussion about how much more we can get in a new Congress. So it's been a surprising and exciting year that through this horrible time has gotten people to question their assumptions and open their minds to doing things a little bit differently. And that's something we can think about going forward. Now, I know everyone hears things like people will never get back on transit. Cities are dying. Things will bounce back for driving, but no other mode. What I will tell you is anyone who tells you nothing will change should just be dismissed out of hand. Anyone who tells you everything would change is equally, uncredible. And anyone who tells you that they know exactly how things will change, we shouldn't spend much time listening to. We should pay attention to what's going on, to how people are responding to spending more time in their neighborhoods during the day, to reconsidering whether or not they're going to go back to work full time, to leaders of organizations who are now recognizing they don't need all of their employees to be in the office at the exact time. There is going to be change. We don't know what it is, but much of what we have talked about for years fits into a lot of the things that people are considering going forward. So now we have to look at all that we need to do in the coming year. And there's a lot of opportunity, and I'm going to say this, there's a lot of opportunity no matter what happens next week. And this is really important for us to remember. The opportunity is there regardless, and we have the same job regardless. So jumping to the next slide, we have, I forgot this one, I'm sorry. One other big accomplishment of last year, which again, I never would have predicted, both the House and Senate Select Committees on climate included the built environment and transportation as ways to tackle climate change. That is a gobsmacking shift from offices who didn't even want to have the conversation 12 months before. And if you look at their reports, and if you haven't, I highly encourage you to do it, you would think that SGA or CSG or many of our organizations wrote it for them. And that is an important step forward and something we will jump off of in the new Congress. So moving forward, I think what we're gonna have to do, one more, it is immediately focus on opportunities to come. One, which is super exciting, is we are working with Representative Chuy Garcia from Chicago, who wants to introduce a transit parity bill to say that transit should receive the same amount of funding as highways. Right now in the transportation program, 80% of funding goes to highways, 20% to transit. It was a deal struck by urban members of the House or members of the House that represented urban districts in 1982. And that was the last big demand that they made. So now we're going to make a new one, and that's going to be parity. The goal is to get at least 50 co-sponsors by the end of the year and build that up quickly in the new year to 100, and have this as part of the conversation going into the next reauthorization bill. This is another thing that blew my mind, because last summer there was a call to do this as part of an amendment process to the House reauthorization bill. And they were clamoring at a time where I didn't think we'd laid the groundwork for this yet. But we had members of Congress telling me I wasn't pushing hard enough. That is a wild situation for me to live through. And now they're raring to go. And we can come and help them to add to the support and introduce people to the possibility that's behind it. If we go on to the next slide, we will have some sort of stimulus bill in the new year, no matter what happens. It might be smaller, depending, if the Republicans hold the Senate and President Trump is reelected, but there will be something. And if it is a Democratic Senate and a President Biden, it will be a big stimulus bill. But big or small, it doesn't matter how much money is in it when it comes to infrastructure. It matters how that money is spent. And we didn't do a great job in how it was spent in 2009. It was really an opportunity for folks to take projects off the shelf that they had deprioritized because they didn't have enough money to do it. And if they had to rank projects, these are the ones that fell off the list, and they were able to put it back on the list. We don't want this recovery bill or stimulus bill to work that way. We want a bill, if it's meant to create jobs, then maintenance jobs make more jobs per dollar spent than new construction, expansions of highways, things like that. Operational improvements in funding transit operations preserves and creates more jobs. Transit itself creates more jobs than highways. We need to make sure members of Congress know this and see this as the opportunity it is. What we really want to warn folks of is if we just allow money to go into the existing pot, there's a lot of projects that were planned based on traffic operating the way it always has, with a huge morning peak and an afternoon peak, which is not the traffic pattern now and won't be for a while, if it ever is again. We don't want to give people an excuse to go fund something that will be a sunk cost for a problem that may not even reappear. So we need to make sure it's not just about money, it's about how that money is spent. If we go on to the next slide, talking about the relationship between transportation and equity, I had the great fortune to be part of a group of organizations that worked with the Wellbeing Trust to talk about what an equitable and climate-friendly recovery would look like. There were 7 different focus areas, and we got to write the transportation piece and really talk about the impact of transportation on particularly racial equity, and how the current situation is quite harsh. Much of our program comes out of a time where infrastructure was used to push people of color out of their homes and to split Black neighborhoods in particular from the rest of the community. And we live with that legacy. And that's something we need to talk about going forward. It's not enough to just go forward ignoring the past. We have to recognize that we have some past mistakes to fix. And maybe some of a stimulus bill could go in to repairing some of the damage caused by the early days of the highway program and urban renewal. Going on, we need to continue to make the case for the connection between climate and the built environment. We find this, I have to say, particularly when it comes to, unfortunately, statewide elected Democrats, both in the Senate and the gubernatorial level. This connection is not well understood. And some of our greatest climate champion governors and members of the Senate do not want to touch the transportation program. They're strongly in belief that they will just, give everybody an electric vehicle and move on their way, and don't want to recognize that the very system that is built for the electric vehicle is bad for the climate, but that it's also bad for many other things, including equity and equitable access to economic opportunity and necessities. And we need to also, there's a lot of polling going on that people should pay attention to, because saying things like fix it first is not actually cutting edge for the public anymore. When we did some polling with Transit Center and the McHarg Center at Penn and Data for Progress, we found that 60% of those polled and slightly more Republicans were in favor of a 10-year moratorium on highway building to focus on maintenance. So I fear that many of us who've gone through a lot of defeats are shy on a lot of our priorities. We don't need to be shy anymore. The public is with us. It's time to bring policymakers along with us. Many of the policymakers on this Zoom have been pushing this for years. And I think the good news is with your help, we can push our federal policymakers a little bit more and our governors a little bit more. And then I think it's just reminding people, you can jump past this, reminding people that there's a lot that is wrong with our current system that was wrong before and is really harmed now, but will be wrong again. So we'll come out with a new Dangerous by Design in 2021. If you go on, we can remind folks of all of the repair needs that are not being addressed, that more money is not solving because our priorities are wrong. And finally, that building more highways does not result in less congestion. In fact, if you follow the numbers in the largest 100 metropolitan areas, it seems like the more highways folks build, the worse their congestion gets. And there's some great, pretty graphics for folks to pull out of this report. But before we take on this challenge, oh, and yeah, I like this GIF a lot. We're doing our best to explain to people what induced demand is and why expanding highways doesn't work. And if any of you have come up with great ways to do this, we really invite you to share it with everyone on this call so we can all use it, to explain that when you make a trip easier, people just add trips. It's as simple as that. It's not like a waterway where the water is finite. We can always add more trips. And then we expand a development and we create longer trips and we clog everything up, and it happens repeatedly, and we struggle to ever learn. So finishing off, the next slide is my last one. Just a reminder of what our priorities are, but these are the things that are really gaining popularity, and we are finding a ready crowd of supporters for these issues in terms of getting funding, additional $32 billion for transit, which Stuart already mentioned, and is part of our coalition. It's a nationwide, really riled up crowd ready to go and fight to make sure transit can make it through COVID and is there for our recovery. It's a really exciting group that I don't think, unfortunately, would have gotten together otherwise, but we will keep it together no matter what going forward. And I will finish up by saying, before we go on to this challenge, my former boss, who many of you know, Roy Kienitz, who was my boss at USDOT, used to, when I got a little overwhelmed by all we had to do, remind me to look backwards at all that we've accomplished. And I think that everyone on this call needs to remind themselves of your part in making this happen. Back in 2009, when I started out at USDOT, I remember sitting with House appropriators and having them look at me and say, but what is smart growth? What is livability? I haven't had that conversation in a very long time. And that's because of what we have done together. We've made the case for the issues that people are paying attention to now. And because we have credibility on those issues, they're listening even closer now. If we hadn't been banging our heads against the wall for so long, they wouldn't be paying attention to us now. And they are paying attention in a way that's really important for us. As I said before, we wouldn't have gotten transit operating support. And even though we didn't have a recovery bill this fall, one of the last reports about negotiations was that both the White House and the House thought transit would be one of the easiest things to agree on. That is a sea change and a really exciting thing to see. So just like Roy told me, we should all remind ourselves that we've come a long way. We have a ton to do next year, but people are listening. And I am just super excited to get a chance to work with all of you on these things. And I just hope that next year, some of it is in person. Thanks for having me.
Let's hear it for Beth. Thank you, Beth. I'm inspired. We have time for questions. If folks have questions here, they can be wonky ones, Cheryl, if you want. I'll ask one. What does the fact that the nation has added trillions to their national debt mean for infrastructure? Does it strengthen the case for the fixing what we've already built first and for smart growth?
Does anybody talk about debt anymore? I honestly haven't heard any conversation about that. I think at this point, when we talk about a recovery bill, it's going to be free from a lot of those conversations, at least early in the year. Now, Stuart, I do just want to say again, there's going to be in many cases, a money is no object. We don't want that. We don't want to encourage that, because the gut reaction will be to spend it on infrastructure just by shoving it into existing flawed programs. So we need to be careful.
And to confirm, I think you've mentioned that, and I think it is important to emphasize what you said, that the Senate could be our biggest challenge, and Senate Democrats could also be a particular challenge there, because they just don't get this stuff. And
yeah, and they desperately want to keep this issue as bipartisan, and that is a bigger priority than any of the objectives like climate or equity. And I hate to say that. I mean, I used to work in one of those offices, but there's an assumption that if the Democrats take the Senate, that there will be a move to make their approach to transportation and the built environment more in line with how we think. You should not expect that. You should expect that to be a very uphill climb, and we should go in prepared for it.
Any questions?
Do not recognize Harriet.
That's yeah, I saw Harriet's question. I will not. I see her and Jeff laughing in the background. Jeff's smiling from his retirement there. Jeff, we're going to bring you back from retirement. We're going to need all the troops possible here. I have one other quick question, which is you've got a great focus program of those three main areas, one of which is connectivity, but you and I have talked about that, and a lot of that is really about accessibility and proximity, right?
Yes, and that's why I get so excited about working on access to jobs and essential services. The way we are doing it with our partners at the University of Wisconsin, and the way that they score projects in Virginia, in fact, is using GIS to determine how easily you can arrive at your destination. Something that sounds very fundamental, but the way we do in transportation right now, the way we measure the effectiveness of the transportation program is how fast do the cars go, not whether or not you arrive, ever. That's not important. It's just incidental. So, you know, if people were to drive around in circles at the speed limit, that would be a successful system the way we measure the transportation system today. But if you went and stop and go traffic for a very short time and arrived at your destination quickly, or walked there, that would be, well, driving stop and go would be a failure, even if it was a 5-minute trip, because you're driving so slow compared to the speed limit. Walking wouldn't be caught by the models at all, so you wouldn't exist. So there's a lot that we need to do to fix transportation. And while people are focusing on the wrong measure, it's very hard to imagine that you would get the right sorts of projects. But the super exciting thing about using GIS in this way, something that wasn't available, not only in the early days of the transportation program, but even 15, 20 years ago, is you can solve a lack of good access to your necessities by moving necessities closer to you, not by spending a massive amount of money expanding the transportation system. And so it finally puts the relationship between transportation and the built environment on the same board.
Terrific. And that is at the core of what we've been advocating for, that accessibility, that proximity, to avoid those trips in the first place. One question here is about how we can develop some talking points for our congressional reps that can be shared with the larger community. I assume that's something you all can help produce.
Absolutely. And I will invite folks, if there's a particular issue that you're working on that you could use some help, you should just give us a call. We'd be happy to help you think things through. We might have had similar conversations with some of them, and might have a sense of opportunities. Plus, it's just nice to hear from you all and hear what you're hearing on the ground, because that helps us formulate better policy too.
Here are two related questions. What states have you seen moving forward with better transportation investment policies and priorities? And how can we give more visibility to Virginia's success with performance-based planning?
Oh, those are good questions. You know, there are folks that are doing really interesting things. I think Secretary Pollock in Massachusetts has done some really interesting things. Some of it's highly technical, but it's really transformative. Simple things like before she intervened with some changes, if you wanted to build a complete street, for example, you had to go through an elaborate process to get exceptions to the rules that could take 18 to 24 months. Now, to not build a complete streets project, you have to go through an elaborate process of exceptions that ends on the secretary's desk, and you have to make the case directly to her. So just things like that have made big changes in their design of whatever they're working on. We've seen some really interesting shifts at Washington State. Yeah, so there's all kinds of things. We've had great conversations with folks in Hawaii. We've been working with folks in Illinois and Connecticut. So yeah, there's some progress all around. I wouldn't say anyone's got everything right, but there's pieces in every place that build to something really exciting. And in terms of Virginia, I mean, you've got some great folks at VDOT who can tell the story really well. I think we need to spend more time explaining what they do and drawing attention to it. We do have folks in other states that are trying to promote similar things there. But sometimes when you're first out, it can be hard to get attention. It requires you being part of a posse. So maybe once there's 2 or 3 states doing something similar, it will be a little bit easier to get attention.
Councilmember Duncan from Falls Church has raised his hand to ask a question. I'm going to try to unmute him, or my team can unmute him, and you can ask your question, Phil.
Great, thank you. Moving necessities closer to where we live. You have just defined my whole objective for the past 8 years. So zooming into this was worth it just to hear that. It is, thank you though, for all you do. And it is helpful to look backwards and see where we were and where we've been able to come, at least in our community, not to just brag on us, but we do it with the help of and with the talking points provided by groups like yours, Stuart and Beth. You know, all these are very helpful because, you know, it is a fight in the trenches every day. You know, why do we have to have another grocery store? We got one in town already. I can just hop in my car and drive to it. Why do we need movie theaters? I can go to Tyson's to the movies. You know, it's like, could you envision a world where you did not have to get in your car to do everything that you need to do? And it's, you know, there are a lot of people that, at least in my community, who get it. And there are some people who, you know, did not move here with that in mind. And I don't know, it's a big rock.
Well, folks, if you haven't been to Falls Church recently, check it out. Phil and his fellow council members, the mayor, planning commissioners, and staff have been doing an amazing job. Sonia and I did a walking tour of the railroad cottages pre-pandemic, and we're planning a virtual walking tour of West Falls Church, which is the next exciting metro station.
Yeah, thank you. So thank you all. Just one question. Equity. I was just at a subcommittee meeting about, tell me, you know, 2 or 3 things that transportation and equity, you know, how they interact. If I want to promote equity, what am I'm obviously for mass transit, but give me some words. Thank you.
First off, thank you for everything that you do and for, you know, fighting on the ground to change communities for the better. I have been out to your area and have seen the change on the ground. It's really exciting to see. I can tell you that when I was a student at Louisiana State University, my apartment complex was right next door to a grocery store, but I could not get there outside of a car because there was a wall between my complex and the grocery store, and there was no place to walk around the wall except in traffic. So sometimes proximity is not everything, but proximity is a good start. And as someone who walks to the grocery, to 2 different groceries regularly, I would never live any other way again. But in terms of talking about equity, there are a handful of things. The easiest thing is building roadways that are safe for people. We find that a lot of times the highest speed arterials go through neighborhoods of color. And they, even if they are not quite the physical blockade as a rail bed or a highway would be, a separated highway, they're still their own kind of wall because places to cross are so far apart from each other because the speed of the vehicles themselves going by at 40, 45 miles per hour make being near that roadway a scary thing, especially if, you know, maybe you're trying to bring along a child who can't move quite as quickly. Maybe you're a little bit older and you're not moving as fast. Maybe you have an injury. You're not moving quite as fast. You're carrying heavy things. So the speed of those roadways, the fact that they're wide and it takes a lot to get across them. Our crossings are not set up to make them easy. They're made to ensure that cars don't have to stop for very long. So you'll see the light change and you have 10 seconds to get across this massive intersection. These are things that while they don't look like a wall, they are a wall, and they impact people who don't have cars, which are much more likely to be people of color. So the place you start is making those roadways friendly, accommodating, and really comfortable for all people, whether they're walking, biking, or rolling. And B, we need to remember that it has to happen in the communities that are being impacted by it the most. And we know that people of color die as pedestrians at a much higher rate than their white counterparts. And that is partially because people of color are less likely to own a car, but also because these dangerous roads are more likely to go through their neighborhoods. So that is my absolute starting place. Transit becomes easier when that roadway is safe, because transit is not a real service if you can't get there without, entering into a death sport to arrive at the bus stop. So transit works much better once we have those safe roads. And then it is about bringing the things that people need closer to them. Again, my experience in Baton Rouge, Louisiana was I needed to find a job, but I couldn't afford a car until I got a job. But I couldn't get the job because I didn't have a car, but I couldn't get a car because I didn't have a job. If we want people to be able to enter into the workforce and build their way up and be part of the American dream without mommy and daddy buying them a car, and not everyone can have them do that, we need to make sure that they can reach important destinations like schools, like medical care, like banks, like grocery stores and jobs outside of a vehicle. And that is about making a safe road, providing transit, and bringing the essentials close to them.
Thank you, Beth. Folks, this is how you talk about it, the way she's doing it right now. By the way, I'm going to duck two questions, which would take hours, which is the Purple Line and 495. I'm sorry, we're not going to go down those dark paths tonight. We're going to stay in the light, and we're going to talk about the wonderful world we're trying to build together. We're about to go into our breakouts, but let's first hear it for Beth. And you're welcome to stay with us, Beth. But if you got to go home back for the kids, and bedtime stories or whatever, you can part. Let me share screen now, and we'll talk about the breakouts real quickly.